Please listen carefully.
Hello, universe. Welcome to the Optimist Daily Update. I'm Summers McKay.
And I'm Christy Jansen, and we are part of the team behind the Optimist Daily, making solutions the news. We bring you reader-funded solutions news every day in order to change the tenor of news media, social media, and the direction of your day to help us all get focused on what's going right in the world.
7 days a week, we publish positive news stories written by award-winning journalists and delivered online to your inbox and through our social channels. And also, we are sharing these solutions in a commute-worthy, walk-worthy, home office-worthy, my daughter is back at school-worthy podcast. Today is Friday, the 14th of January, 2022. Christy, I missed you these last couple days. You and Carissa did a great job, but man, I listened to you, but I didn't get to talk to you.
So sad when we don't get our morning check-ins.
I know.
It's really, you're like my closest friend over this whole pandemic, even though you left the state.
Yeah. Even though we've physically been in each other's presence for all of 5 days and 2 years, I totally concur. Thank you, Carissa, who is quietly listening in the background here, for stepping in. As many of you guys know, toddler parents and school parents and, our kids are getting sent home because of Omicron and the different changing school policies. And my daughter's school has actually decided that they're not going to continue to close classrooms when there is a new positive test. And that's kind of a big move. It's kind of stressful. I think it's a big choice that the school is making, but I'm also grateful because I think what will actually happen, Christy, is I think parents are going to be a little more transparent and a little more likely to, test their kid, because no parent wants to be the one who closes the classroom for 10 days because their kid tested positive. So now if you can test your kid and find out your kid's positive, you'll pull them out of school faster because you're not causing a waterfall effect on everybody else's lives. But it's changing times. It's stressful times. How's high school going for your son?
He's actually, now that he's back in school, he's happy to be back in school. But literally every day we get a notice from the school that 7 people have tested positive or 12 people. Yeah. And he hasn't been notified in terms of those direct contact tracings yet. Mm-hmm. And they're not shutting down the school.
Right.
But they are now testing all the kids on a weekly basis.
Yep.
Spot testing, and I just got a notice yesterday that he tested negative, which I'm happy about. Not surprising, but
Yeah, it is. These are crazy times, man. There's crazy times, and people are stressed, and
just when you think you have it all figured out, the virus mutates and changes everything,
and all the rules change, right?
And the rules change. I just don't make plans anymore. I just am happy for every single day. That's how I have chosen to look at it.
My other, what I am doing on the other side of that is I am making so many plans because I figure 80% of them are going to fall through. So 20% of them can happen, right? So this weekend, my daughter has soccer, ballet, and swim class, and we have 2 play dates scheduled because I know at least out of those things, 2 of them will happen.
All right.
So
you're overcommitting.
Exactly. Overcommitting, overstressed. And all of this, the whole world's kind of undergoing it right now. And I think people might be losing some sleep over it, don't you?
I think that's probably true, which is a good reason for us to launch into our interview.
Yeah, I think so. Well, today, as Christy and Carissa alluded to yesterday, we have an amazing interview with author and television journalist Diane Macedo. And we are talking about her book, The Sleep Fix. Now, everyone can agree a good night's sleep is pretty important for a healthy life. Up to 60% of the population is estimated to suffer from insomnia, while many more unknowingly struggle with other sleep disorders. In The Sleep Fix, we're going to find practical, proven, and surprising solutions for insomnia, snoring, shift work, and more. Diane takes a unique approach to answering this question with both really, really poignant stories about her own journey with sleep trouble, as well as highly researched, globally achieved results in sleep success. So, Christy, tell us a little more about Diane, and then we'll welcome her on the pod.
Real quick. Diane is currently an anchor and correspondent for ABC News, and she appears on Good Morning America, World News Tonight, Nightline, World News Now, and America This Morning. Wow. as well as breaking news reports. She's also an anchor for ABC News Live, where she hosts ABC New Live Updates, The Breakdown, and covers breaking news and special events. She's an alum of Boston College and lives in New York City with her family. And Diane, we are beyond thrilled to have you join us today on the Optimist Daily Update podcast.
Well, hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
How's New York treating you guys today?
It's funny. This whole, you're talking all about COVID and schools and whatnot. And as a mom to a 3-year-old, you are speaking my language because we are living in it right now. So I hear everything that you are saying.
Yeah, it's tricky. And I know that you have a new baby as well. And, that amount of just sort of mom pressure. We talk about mom pressure a lot on the Optimist Daily Update because that's just kind of where Christy and I live on one side of our professional career and then our maternal careers. But it's a lot of pressure for a lot of women right now. And I'm sure that kind of pressure is part of what's affecting sleeplessness in the world today.
It sure does. And, I just wrote a book about sleep. I'm out here promoting it. And I have to catch myself making some of the mistakes that I am trying to advise against in this book because it's so hard to, to really prioritize your sleep at times when there's so many other things going on and you feel like you're being pulled in so many different directions. I love my kids, obviously. I love my family. I love my husband. But when life is so hectic, that moment of silence after everyone goes to bed, and that moment of silence when I wake up before everyone else does, those are some of my favorite times of the day. I think it's hard sometimes to put down the phone or put down the book or put down whatever it is that you're doing to just go to bed because, and I think people think of that as just, it's a bad habit or you're doing something, unproductive or whatnot. But sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's because you want to get something done. And other times it's because that's kind of your version of self-care to have that time to yourself. So, I think the conversation around that is going to continue to evolve. But, I just want people at home to know that I'm there with you. I'm living it myself. And I know how hard it is sometimes to prioritize sleep and really give ourselves the self-care we need in lots of other ways when we're busy taking care of everybody else.
Yeah, I remember actually in the beginning of the pandemic when we had the lockdowns and we stopped having to drive to work and we were all kind of figuring it out and the whole world was just like, suddenly I was sleeping a lot more and certain of my physical ailments suddenly went away.
I'm not surprised to hear it. I think a lot of people have had that experience. The pandemic has been a really interesting sort of global sleep experiment, and we'll be, garnering data from that, I think, for years and years to come, particularly since we're still going through it, sadly. But for some people, they have had your experience where there are a lot of people sleeping better right now because, teenagers, for example, who there's a, long and ongoing debate of whether we should figure out a way to make school time start later.
We actually wrote an article about that yesterday.
There you go. Because teens are naturally, I think a lot of people think of night owls and morning people or early birds as, kind of a choice that you make. But that's a biological thing.
Yeah.
And it's both genetic, but it's also related to age. And so most teenagers are biological night owls. And when you force a biological night owl to wake up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, without the tools for them to try to kind of shift their circadian rhythm to meet that schedule, especially, you're basically forcing someone to be jet lagged every single day. And then we get surprised when our teens don't perform as well as we want to, or when they're grouchy with us in the evening and so on. And, and there is evidence to show now that a lot of people, and particularly teens, are sleeping better in the pandemic because they don't have to wake up so early. And people who are able to sleep more close to when their circadian rhythm wants them to be sleeping, they start to sleep better. And then they feel better in lots of other ways, which has been your experience. And it was mine as well.
Yeah, I have a teen who, as a kid, he was a total morning person. He would wake up before everybody, you know, and now he's definitely a night owl. And he was so happy with homeschooling or, Zoom schooling because it meant he didn't have to wake up early to go to school.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I want to dig into the book a little bit. I certainly have explored sleep and at this point in my life have prioritized. My daughter and I co-sleep, and I know that co-sleeping is somewhat controversial, but to us, it is actually, I've had more restful sleep in the 2.5 years that she has been mine because when she goes to bed, oftentimes I go to bed. I go to bed early. But let's talk a little bit about what drives people to wake up and fall asleep, and what are the common sleep disorders that really interfere with those biological processes, that circadian rhythm that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, one, I want to start by addressing the whole co-sleeping thing, because I think above all else, do what works for you.
Yeah.
If you're co-sleeping and you feel like that's working well for you, it's working well for your daughter, it's working well for your family, then that is the best solution for you. I think so many times we try to kind of fit into a box that people tell us we have to follow these 10 tips to sleep well. And, the best sleep tips for each person is going to differ based on you, your family's needs, and what it is that's keeping you awake. Mm-hmm. So do what works for you. And the best sleep solutions are the ones you'll actually do. So that's kind of the other part of the point. In terms of what makes us fall asleep, what makes us wake up, and what interferes with that, there are two main systems that drive us to wake up and fall asleep. One is called your sleep drive. And I like to think of this like hunger. It's super straightforward. The same way that the longer you go without eating, the more hungry you get, and the more you eat, the less hungry you get, and the cycle goes on and on all day long. Sleep drive works the same way. The longer you are awake, the more a chemical called adenosine builds up in your brain, and that chemical makes you sleepy. And so we call that your sleep drive or sleep pressure building up. So when you spend, the whole day awake, you build up your sleep drive nice and high. And then at the end of the day, as you go to sleep and you sleep through the night, that chemical dissipates. And so your sleepiness, of course, dissipates along with it. So after a full night's sleep, you then wake up in the morning with no adenosine in your brain. And so you're no longer sleepy. And then the cycle starts all over again. Now, the other part of the equation is your circadian rhythm, which is essentially a biological clock that gives you wake signals and sometimes sleep signals at specific times of the day, regardless of whether or not you've slept. And that's what determines whether or not you're a morning person or a night owl, because it depends on what time your circadian rhythm starts giving you those wake signals and starts giving you those sleep signals. And that will depend on what time of night you start to feel sleepy and what time in the morning you finally start to feel awake. And ideally, you want those two systems to be working in sync so that you're waking up at the same time you're getting those wake signals from your circadian rhythm, having gotten a full night's sleep. Your sleep drive is nice and low, so now you feel nice and awake. You spend the whole day awake as your circadian rhythm keeps you energized as well. And then at nighttime, when your circadian rhythm starts to take its daily dive, your sleep drive is nice and high. You go to bed, both of those things keep you asleep. And then as you near morning, your circadian rhythm rises again, your sleep drive is low, and you start it all over. Now that all sounds awesome, but obviously when your sleep drive and your schedule are not in sync, you can see how that becomes a problem. And for a lot of us, I'd say most of us, arguably, one of those two systems is not working well for us, if not both.
So since I started reading your book, I've certainly been reconsidering my sleep habits and interrogating my own methods for dealing with the thing that I most identified with, I think, was that racing mind, that sort of the insomnia that wakes my mind, that wakes me up. And then how do you get your quiet enough? So what I've done is I started listening to history podcasts. It keeps me in bed with my eyes closed. And it's engaging enough to not make me go into circular thinking. I usually fall asleep but boring enough to let me fall back to sleep. And I don't know if that's like a good strategy, or am I hurting myself by not trying to figure something else out? What are your strategies for racing mind?
I love that strategy. And you're probably not this far into the book, but I do mention actually listening to podcasts or an audiobook as one technique, because that's something that I love to do. And this, again, falls into what works for you, because for some people, they may find that they still feel kind of agitated and frustrated in bed. And really the key that you want when you have that problem is just to not spend time awake and frustrated in bed. And so if putting on the podcast or the audiobook or whatever it is relaxes you enough that you don't sort of feel that stimulated frustration, you're no longer focusing on, oh my God, why am I not sleeping? And you can kind of absorb the material. And the material isn't so stimulating that it's then keeping you awake because you're so into the podcast, you need to know what happens next. Now you're forcing yourself to stay awake. You kind of need to find a nice balance between the two.
Yeah.
And so this is why you'll often hear people say, for example, to read a book, because, for most people, if they sit on the couch and they read a book, they start to become sleepy. But, one of the people that I interviewed was my friend Brad, who said for him, he would start reading a book, but he would get so into the book that, it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning and he was still reading. And so he found a nice sweet spot. I love that you mentioned history podcasts, because he found a nice sweet spot in reading cookbooks because he likes cooking. So it's still interesting to him, but not so much that he feels like he can't put the book down. I think a lot of people think that they need to read, an instruction manual or phone book or something really boring. And even some sleep experts will advise this. But the problem is, yes, boredom can put you to sleep, but it can also foster frustration. And that's the effect that it had on me. And now when you're going to bed at night, even if it works in the moment, the next night you have one more thing to fear. You're not only sitting there saying, oh God, I really hope I fall asleep because I want to be able to function well tomorrow. But now you're also saying, God, I really hope I don't wake up in the middle of the night because then I'm going to have to read that effing phone book again. And nobody wants to have to, and that just creates another source of anxiety for you. And it's that anxiety that so frequently is keeping us awake. So I love the idea. If the history podcast is enjoyable enough to you, and yet it's also kind of relaxing enough, then that's exactly the kind of activity that's perfect for you to do if you either can't fall asleep or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep.
No, I think that's so interesting to highlight that it's the frustration and the self-judgment or the worry that actually charges up your insomnia in a negative way. So
I wanted to just take a second. I love your reminder that what works for one person isn't going to work for another person, because my husband and I have different sleep experiences. He's like Christy. He needs the podcast. He needs the noise. He needs that distraction going in order for him to settle down. And for me, I need white noise. I just don't need. And so because he doesn't sleep as easily as I do, for so long I've been like, oh, honey, you listen to too many podcasts, or you shouldn't do that at night, or you should. And he's like, this is what works for me. And so it's this battle. And I guess like all things in marriage, right? What works for me doesn't have to work for him. But I think that's really important, that it is not a one size fits all solution.
Yeah, 100%. And I learned a really interesting tidbit when I was researching the book, because I'm a singer and a former a cappella singer at that. And when I was researching the part about, white noise and brown noise and music and natural sounds and all that stuff, I learned that music affects people differently. So by and large, music apparently is a great tool for insomniacs, because if you sort of create this sleep playlist and you listen to it at the same time every night in sort of a calm and relaxed state, after a few weeks, I think it was 3 weeks that they said you have to stick to it, the music itself can start to alleviate some of your insomnia symptoms. And they show that it helped severe insomniacs become, less severe insomniacs, and mild insomniacs actually alleviate their insomnia entirely. However, he told me, the researcher who led this study said it's not actually recommended for musicians, because we listen to music differently. Mm-hmm. We listen to the music in sort of this analytical way. So if I listen to a piece of music, I'm not just like, oh, that's a nice song. I'm listening to the arrangement and picking out the harmony parts and all this stuff. And so now if I were to try to listen to music before bed, it would kind of put my brain into work mode, which is the opposite of what we want to do. Right. And so, same for, boring stories, for example. I interview one of my colleagues in the book who tried one of those, boring story apps that are supposed to help you put to sleep. And he was like, we're professional storytellers for a living. So all I could do was then focus on how crappy this story was. And how badly I wanted to fix it. And I was like, oh, man, you got to take that part out, trim the fat here. He's like, and the next thing I knew, I was more awake than before, frustrated at how bad this story was, and thinking about all the ways I wanted to fix it. So, yes, it's absolutely a unique experience. And they do actually make, I mentioned this in the book, they make headphone headbands that are really comfortable to sleep in. And so if you and your partner, if one person wants, sound masking like white noise, brown noise, natural noise, whatever, and the other person wants silence, let's say, or wants to listen to something different, then you guys can listen to two different things without disturbing each other in this kind of device that will help you sleep comfortably.
See, I've taken the go ahead, wear your headphones, my white noise machine is on.
Oh, you claim the territory, and he
exactly.
has
but
to deal with
I
it.
Would say,
hey, whatever works for you, again.
Yeah, and our daughter as well. So interesting that you talk about music can be helpful, but can also be distracting. We have a playlist that we play of Brennan's lullabies, and they are a cue for her that it's time for bed. Mm-hmm. And she now will go up to our smart speaker and say, smart speaker, play Brennan's lullabies. And then she starts unwinding herself for bed. And it's just really interesting because she loves music and she sings all the time, but she doesn't fall asleep to the music, but she uses it as her cue. And, I look at her as my little like science experiment of like watching how humans before we break them should work. Before the world does everything wrong. But watching her kind of gently unwind herself, and then also just truly, there's no alarm clocks in our lives. She's 2.5. I work from home. Yep. Right. So, and as we joked earlier in the pod, I can come to work and it's a good day if I get a bra on. But
what's a bra?
Yeah. But, I think if you're able to just follow that natural rhythm that, Brennan and I are so fortunate, it's amazing. But Christy, you were really curious and wanted to talk about kind of graveyard shifts, huh?
Yeah. Well, because Diane, I mean,
I love this topic.
You've been a morning show host. You've been a late night anchor. It's not a surprise to me that you would find sleep be a topic that you really want to research. Also, a parent of a young child. I've been there, another major sleep interrupter. So sometimes you can't go to sleep at the, between 10 and 11, which I guess they're now saying is the optimal time for health to fall asleep. But what are some practical fixes for graveyard workers? How can you make yourself healthy by having really unusual sleep habits in terms of when you sleep?
I haven't read whatever specific study you're saying with the 10 to 11 for optimal health, but my eyebrows always go up when I hear anyone recommending any specific time of day to go to sleep for the blanket population, because our circadian rhythms can vary dramatically. So the ideal bedtime for one person can be extremely different from the ideal bedtime for another person, and the same for the amount of sleep we all need. So I just want people to know that. In terms of the graveyard shift, one of the reasons this chapter was so important to me is that I lived this. Now I have the most normal schedule I've ever had as a journalist. And I say now, meaning when I get off maternity leave in a couple of weeks. But I was working overnight.
Oh, that's right. You're still on maternity leave.
Yeah, eking out the last bit of it.
I love it. You're like, I'm on maternity leave. Perfect.
Yeah, because maternity leave is not normal hours, to be clear. Yeah. And it pretty much is a graveyard shift also.
Exactly.
But when I go back to work, I will be returning to what has been the most normal schedule I've had in my whole career. And when my problems peaked, I had a 3 a.m. schedule followed by a 1:30 a.m. schedule. And then I had a true overnight where I was going in at like 10 or 11 and getting out around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I had problems with all three that just got worse and worse. But when I got to the last one and then I started seeking solutions, what I kept hearing was, well, essentially you're going to have to quit your job if you want to sleep well again. And I just thought, well, that seems really unrealistic to me. One, because I love my job and I don't want to quit. But also, lots of people have to work overnight, right? We give birth to babies in the middle of the night sometimes. People need emergency surgeries in the middle of the night. What is the obstetrician going to say? Sorry, we can't deliver your kid right now because I got to go to bed. My shift starts again at 9 a.m. See you then,
Absolutely. So, well, what about the supply chain workers, the people who are, unloading those ships in the middle of the night?
Lots and lots of people. Granted, I think some employers have unfavorable work shifts for reasons that maybe are unnecessary. But there are a lot of people that just blanket need to work overnight. And so I just thought, well, that can't be the solution. And I started thinking about jet lag. Because jet lag is the same thing. It's a circadian rhythm disorder. And all a circadian rhythm disorder means is you are trying to go to sleep at a time your body still thinks you should be awake. And so it's sending you wake signals. And then you're trying to wake up at a time that your body thinks that you should be asleep. And so it's still sending you sleep signals. And anyone who's traveled understands that that can feel really horrible on both ends of the spectrum, both when you're trying to sleep and you can't, and when you're trying to get up and do things and be awake. And you just feel like you're dragging in every way possible. And it can have long-term, repercussions on your health and well-being and so on. But when we travel, we do eventually adjust to jet lag. Why? Because of when we see light, when we see dark, what time we eat, what time we exercise, and what time we wake up and go to sleep. And so I just started thinking, well, if our bodies can adjust in that way when we are traveling, then we must surely be able to use those tools to do the same thing when we're here at home and just have to work at a different time than my natural body clock wants me to, which is the case for a lot of people, not just traditional shift workers. And sure enough, once I started researching this and talking to people who, research different aspects of circadian rhythm, it is true. you can use these tools to adjust. And so for me, for example, getting a light therapy lamp and putting that in my bathroom so that when I got up at, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., etc., which for me was morning, and I started brushing my teeth and washing my face and doing my makeup and whatever else and getting ready, I would just turn on this thing. It just looks like a picture frame that shines light, like an e-reader that shines light in your face and has a little kickstand that makes it stand upright. And I just turn it on in my bathroom, and that allowed me to create an environment that kind of mimicked the sunlight that you want in the morning to tell my brain that, hey, it's morning. It's time to wake up. And at night, my night, which was 9 o'clock in the morning, I would throw on sunglasses before I left one studio to go to the other, and then ultimately left the Times Square studio, which is where we shoot Good Morning America, to then come home. So that when I was leaving and outside during this time that was for me supposed to be evening, I wasn't getting this bright sunlight hitting my eyes. My sunglasses protected me from that. And I dim the lights in my office toward the end of my shift and make sure I got bright light at the beginning of my shift. All of these different things. And essentially, if you suffer from a circadian rhythm disorder, yes, the ideal thing would be to change your schedule to align better with your circadian rhythm. But when that's not a realistic option, the next best thing to do is to essentially trick your body into thinking you changed your schedule.
I love
and
that.
There are a lot of simple things we can do to accomplish that.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was actually talking about this on the podcast the other day with Carissa, but I have a little indoor garden now. I have one of those aero gardens that has LED light, and I'm like using that as my extra sunlight because it's winter, so I'm not getting all of my required daylight hours.
Well, and that's why sometimes with sleep, the kind of typical sleep solutions that are out there, sometimes they're just completely off base, but other times they just don't offer enough kind of flexibility and gray area to be practical for people. So the ideal when it comes to guidance and circadian rhythm, particularly for people who have difficulty waking up, is usually, get outside and get 30 minutes of bright sunlight first thing in the morning. Like, yeah, maybe that's the ideal, but for a lot of us, especially those of us who struggle to wake up in the morning, we don't have an extra 30 minutes to hang out outside. And it's January right now in New York. Like, good luck hanging out outside right now.
Exactly. And it all depends on where you live, too, because when I lived in Southern California, the sun rose pretty early, right? Like sunrise walks, early morning walks were kind of a thing. And so I would always go get up and walk with sunrise. Now, sunrise where I live in Austin, Texas, it can be like 7:20 in the morning. And my God, we need to be like already on our way into the day. So we actually got one of those hatch lights. If my husband's traveling for work, we can use it. He hates it when it's on. But
right, because she's sleeping in your room.
Exactly, because she's sleeping in our room. And then, but we had, and it creates artificial sunlight for us because I am such a morning person that it was really, really hard for me to move. Probably one of the most challenging things with my own circadian rhythm is to move to a place that is darker, longer than where I used to live. So depending on where you are and latitude can make a real difference on how much sunlight you can get in the morning.
Absolutely. And, this is where it comes into play in the evenings, too, because someone who, has to wake up for work 5 or 6 a.m. or whatnot, that may not, you may not consider that a traditional morning shift. But in the summertime, when, in many places, the sun is going down at like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., you are still getting sunlight, in the near hours before you have to be in bed, or sometimes the sun's still up when you have to go to bed to get enough sleep to make it into work. And so, and that's not even a traditional shift worker. So even some of those people can benefit from, if you want to, hang out outside and have dinner outside while the sun's still up, throw some sunglasses on.
Yeah, I love that tip. And next time
I shades down if you're inside at home. Yeah. And there are lots of different things you can do, and you can choose then what the best solutions are for you and your family, what makes the most sense with your lifestyle. But just that general idea of, if you're that person, you want to start limiting your light intake, normally about 4 to 5 hours before you go to bed if you have trouble falling asleep at night. And a lot of us don't realize that the sun, in many cases, especially during the summer, is still shining bright at that time.
Yeah. I just realized, Christy,
what?
We are having so much fun,
but I have 2 more questions.
Summers. Yeah, okay.
2 more questions. One really quick, because we didn't talk about this yet, because I don't think it affects any of us in this virtual room. But since I've been reading your book, I've been paying close attention to also how my husband sleeps. And I noticed that he might have sleep apnea, because I noticed there's that catch in his breath that,
Ooh.
and one of the things that you write about is how sometimes it's your partners that know your sleep patterns better than you do. So talk a little bit about sleep apnea and how can I bring it up to him in a way that feels good?
Okay, the last question I don't think I'm equipped to answer in terms of, how to massage that message best. I think you're going to have to figure out that part because your husband far better than I do.
Yeah, there's a book you can give him, Christy.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, the sleep fix.
Yeah. Just buy him the sleep fix and be like, babe, this really great book. I think you're going to love it. Take a look at chapter X. But yeah, so frequently, and especially with something like sleep apnea, it is our partners who flag these problems, which sadly means a lot of women go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed for sleep apnea because for whatever reason, men seem to notice less about their partner's sleep than women do. So you have a lot of wives flagging, sleep apnea in their partners, and it doesn't work necessarily the other way around. Also, women present with far more subtle symptoms. And, sometimes anyway, and a lot of doctors don't realize that women can have sleep apnea. So if you're a woman, you're thin or you're young, you can often go in with sleep apnea symptoms and have the doctor not recognize it as that. But in terms of, first, just a quick explainer for those who don't know, sleep apnea is a breathing condition, and it's something that causes you to stop breathing during sleep. Often this is caused because your throat relaxes or your tongue kind of falls back in your throat. It can be prevalent in people with small jaws or with big necks. Sometimes it has to do with your facial structure. So it can often be kind of inherited through families because, it can have to do with the way your face is structured. Or it can sometimes come on if you've gained some weight. Women who are pregnant are more vulnerable to sleep apnea than when they're not pregnant and so on. So there are a lot of different things that can contribute to it. And the much more common kind is obstructive sleep apnea, which is what I'm describing when something sort of closes off your airway. And this will often manifest in someone snoring. And then they kind of stop and you hear them be silent for a little while. And so it's like they're holding their breath. And then all of a sudden they will either start snoring again, or sometimes they'll kind of sound like they're gasping or choking a little bit. And then they kind of resume their normal sleeping, their normal breathing, or their normal snoring pattern again. And that's sort of, the telltale sign. When you hear that and that pause is longer, the criteria for it to be sleep apnea is when that pause is at least 10 seconds. But you can have sort of more mild versions of sleep disordered breathing that are still worth addressing, even if that pause is not as long. But, I want people to realize that even if you don't hear it that audibly and it's not that clear, you can still have sleep apnea. But it sounds like what you're hearing in your husband is a pretty clear indicator that he does have sleep apnea. And I cannot advise this enough to go and get screened. And you do not have to go and get one of these overnight, sleep studies. If you're dragging your feet on getting a sleep apnea diagnosis because you don't want to spend the night in a lab or you don't want to wear a CPAP machine on your face, know that for most people, you don't have to. You can get evaluated for sleep apnea from the comfort of your very own home. They can send you a test in the mail that, some of them are as small as just a tiny thing you put on your finger. And the results go to the specialist who sends you the machine, and they can evaluate the data and tell you from the other end whether or not you have it. And even though the CPAP is the gold standard treatment for, patients who have trouble with CPAP and they feel like they can't sleep with that thing on their face and they've explored other options and they can't, a lot of people can be treated for sleep apnea with something as simple as a mouth guard that's specially designed by a sleep specialist. People find it much more comfortable sometimes or less cumbersome or whatever. And there are a lot of other alternatives, and I kind of cover them all in the book. But I just want people to know that there are a lot of options, and a good sleep specialist should be able to walk you through them so that you know what's best for you. Because the sleep study in a lab may be much more thorough, but it's not going to do you any good if you're not going to get it. Yeah. And the CPAP machine may be the gold standard treatment, but again, it's not going to do you any good if you're not going to actually wear it while you're sleeping.
Well, there's so many tools in the world right now. I used to be obsessed with wearing my smartwatch at night so that I could get up in the morning and see exactly how many hours I slept. And, we have a Sleep Number bed that has an app that tells me how, I sleep versus my husband. But then it's very confused because there's 3 people in our beds. But there are just so many tools out there working to address people's sleep because it is such an important part of how we can function in this world. Diane, this book is fantastic. Christy and I are both working our way through it. I know that a lot of our listeners are going to enjoy it. We have to wrap this interview, and we usually end every conversation with our guests asking them what makes them optimistic in the world today, for the future, It can be anything from your cup of coffee to, global politics. But what makes you optimistic?
Oh, wow. I mean, one, my kids, to watch a human evolve every single day is just such a fascinating and amazing experience that as much as I knew that I would love being a mom and love my kids, I really didn't grasp that full aspect of it until I was a mom. But also, to be cheesy and go back to the book, I think sleep is a perfect example of something that we often just accept as something that we need to live with and that can't be fixed. And that's just how we're built, and we just need to trudge along this way. And what I learned in my own experience as someone who had at least 2 or 3 different sleep disorders and then learned that I could fix them and I felt amazing afterward, is that I think a lot of times we assume that we have no control over certain problems in our lives. And when we learn that we actually do have a lot more agency than maybe we thought before, and we start addressing those problems, sometimes it's just about pulling on the right thread. And these downward spirals that we feel like we're stuck in can start to reverse and start move in the other direction. And a positive move begets another positive move. And suddenly you feel like, oh, wow, things are turning around for me. And so I just want people out there to know, whether it's sleep you're struggling with or any other thing, these storms only last for so long. And particularly when we try to look and find for what it is in that problem that we have our own agency in, we can then start to reverse things and see those benefits turn around in the right direction. And, a year later or a few weeks later, however long, you're suddenly thinking, wow, I never thought that I could be in that position when I felt like I was in that hole, 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. And so that gives me a lot of optimism as well.
Yeah, some light on the horizon, whether it's
Absolutely.
sun setting or sun rising.
Yeah, and I like the connection to that sense of agency, because that's a mission that we share at the Optimist Daily, trying to reconnect people to their solutions mindset, as opposed to feeling that overwhelmed, like we can't control the world.
Which, by the way, can help you sleep.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to our interview with Diane Macedo and for listening to the Optimist Daily Update today. We promise to continue to share positive, solution-based stories with ideas on how you can participate in this changing world and ensure it is changed for the good. We promise to cover current events with accuracy, legitimate sources, and offer you the information needed most to chart new paths for all of us. Christy, this Friday, what do we want people to do over the weekend?
Well, if they haven't already and they have the means, please consider becoming an emissary on theoptimistdaily.com. And starting at $5 a month, you can support reader-funded independent journalism that is the Optimist Daily and be part of solution-changing consciousness and addressing our world's biggest challenges with that problem-solving mindset. Please help us keep the Optimist Daily free to all who need it, supported by those of us who can. Thank you, Summers. Thank you, Diane. Really fantastic talking to you this morning, and I'm just happy to be here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We'll be back on Monday with more solutions.